Hey, what's up? It's Victor Savell. Today is exciting for me because I've been working on this for about 2 weeks on my free time. How to get good camera matching going on in Blender from even other external applications that are free or very inexpensive. I'm going to look at Voodoo Camera Tracker and After Effects. These are both either free or inexpensive. And then third, I'm going to look at Blender camera tracking. And why am I doing this? Because I'm making a short film based entirely on camera tracked stuff. 3D models put into actual footage that I shoot. Part of this entire process is researching how to do this very cost effectively. I've been very frustrated with the Blender built-in camera tracker, so I wanted other options. So using a combination of all these three, I think I'm pretty solid on how to do this. But I had to do a bunch of research on how to do it properly, and I'm gonna show you this because I haven't found a video that kind of describes all three at the same time, and even the videos I found were very, very old. So let's go through this. First, I'm going to jump into Voodoo Camera Tracker. It's going to be all just on the screen, so get out your pillows. Then we're going to look at After Effects built-in camera tracker, and I'm going to try to touch on the pros and cons of each one. Each one is special in their own way, and finally we're going to jump into Blender. That's my favorite one to use because it's in the pipeline that I'm using, and I don't like to necessarily jump around programs unless I absolutely must. This is actually one of many videos I'm planning to make describing the entire behind the scenes process of making this robot short film, from storytelling to location scouting to artwork to concept to animation, IK, compositing, and of course one of the big ones in this movie is camera tracking. And so this is what this is all about. Let's just jump into this and compare the render results and the workflow using these programs and the good and bad things about each one. And here we are. This is Voodoo Camera Tracker. It's a very old program, but it still somehow manages to export the right kind of Python script that you need in Blender, except a little bit of it is actually messed up, but we'll get into that in a little bit. You're going to want to open your image sequence. You always want to work with an image sequence when you're tracking, not only because you can export it again as an image sequence with very little compression. You don't want to start playing with you know, MOVs or MP4s or AVIs, massive files. You want to just go ahead and have your sequence already ready. This is already preloaded for me because I already had this set up, but you just want to browse to your image sequence and it's going to detect the start and ending frame of it. And here under move type you can select either free move or rotation. That is all that Voodoo supports. You cannot use any footage that you're zooming the camera lens on. That's very important to know. This is a shortcoming of this specific tracker, but hey, it's free for non-commercial use, so that's great. Then you just want to go ahead and click OK and you're gonna see your footage. Nothing special, it's kind of like a media player, and of course when you're ready to track you can go ahead and press track. This is gonna take a little bit because it's only using the CPU. It's gonna pop a lot of tracking points on the screen for you and chug along frame by frame. This is gonna depend on how quick your processor is, and you just want to let this thing render. This is 147 frames. I think it's gonna take maybe 5 minutes. Of course I'm gonna speed this process up so we don't have to sit here and look at this. And here we go. After the tracking's complete, this is what you're gonna see, and you can play your image sequence with all the trackers present. Now this is already enough basically to plug into Blender from here, but there is more you can actually do here. Now if we go through the view menu, you can go under controls and set things up here. I didn't want to change any of that. Under draw controls you can show or hide more tracking points that may mean different things, like there's residuals, and set their colors and everything. Now of course here's the camera parameters, which might be useful for you to replicate in Blender. This is the focal length that it's detected, and it's the film back or sensor size it's also detected. Now under advanced you can go ahead and set up different things for your fine-tuning, but everything's pretty much manual and I didn't want to touch any of that, or I didn't have to just yet. The 3D scene viewer is this nightmare right here, but it's basically showing you how the 3D scene looks like. It's completely broken. It's not letting me move the camera. It did just a minute ago. I think right now it's totally frozen, but it's not like I'm going to use that anyway. However, there's something cool here. If you want to use this modeling tool, this little toolbar pops up. It might pop up on the left side for you. You can move this around, and with a simple click of a button you can just put in any primitive shape or even a mesh, a NURB surface even, and you can play it back with your square already here, kind of floating above what it looks like above the curb here. So that's pretty neat. Not that I'm gonna use this, but it's still pretty cool. To save this, of course, come here to save, and you want to save this as a Blender Python script, 2.5x and higher. I'm using 2.79c at this point, and click OK. This will ask you where to save it, and you want to do that. And then after you save it, it's going to ask you how many 3D F points you want to save, and you just want to export all of them. I've already had mine saved, so that's pretty good there. Also, if you wanted to come here and save your feature points, you can save that into a PNG file. This is nice because if you ever want to come back here and just open your points again and start editing more, then you don't have to rescan the entire thing and wait another 5-10 minutes for that to happen. So that's also pretty neat. I'm just gonna go ahead and save here. That's pretty much it. You can export 3D objects and everything else, but you know, for the most part this software is pretty old at this point, and I don't see myself using most of these features. However, you can also edit and create your own feature points. There's not many features, like there's no undos or anything here, so you want to be pretty careful about what you're doing in this program. But if you wanted to litter some more tracking points around, you can go ahead and add it manually. We've exported our Python script, which we can bring into Blender, so let's see how to bring that into Blender now. And here we are in Blender. This is my default setup or default view here. You can go ahead and change yours as you wish. I resized this window so I don't have to zoom around too much, but basically you want to go to scripting and open your script. And here you go, this loads in. Now if I wanted to go ahead and run this script here, it's going to throw an error right on this line. So if you wanted to comment this out with the hash or pound symbol, I'm not sure what they call it today, but if you wanted to comment that out, it's not going to run that specific line of code. So go ahead and run your script, and boom. And here we have now the tracking points that we saw in Voodoo. So here's our tracking points, and if I wanted to switch into my camera, of course, don't forget that under scene you want to change your camera to one that Voodoo pre-made for us. And here we have all of these tracking points, and you can go ahead and play this. So these tracking points actually just help you kind of put things into the scene. Of course, if you wanted to move things around here and set it up so you're on a grid of some sort, then you can kind of do that here. The sheer number of tracking points, which is I guess about 900 here, is great for you to be able to see what's going on in the scene. Imagine these tracking points basically like sensors that you would have in real life. Of course, you're not gonna have 900 of them, but imagine that this is what it's doing and trying to recreate that wall. Look at this wall right here. I mean, that's impressive based on some images. That's pretty impressive that an older software like this can even reproduce that. That's pretty cool. And now I just jumped back into something else I've already had set up. I didn't want to have to fuddle around too much, so you can actually see this right away. Here's a track that I did in Blender based on the tracking points that I had exported from Voodoo, and as we see, I think this is a pretty good track using these 900 points. The camera solve is pretty decent. Now I'm not sure about the perspective, but even the perspective seems alright to me. If I wanted to kind of recreate, just look at this wall and then look at this cube. So I think it's pretty close. It's pretty close, it's pretty believable that it's actually here, as far as the movement goes, of course. So here we go. this is how easy it is to import into Blender. The pros and cons of this whole thing, the ease of use and the amount of points that it's rendering and the ease of importing was very good. I really think that's gonna be something I use, especially with footage that's a little bit more shaky, because it does do a really good job. But here's my overall pros and cons, and this is an actual rendering of how this looks like. I think for free this is a really good software to use, and it does do a pretty good job with camera matching. And now here we are in After Effects. So basically I have my image sequence, the same one, imported into here onto a layer, and I'm gonna go ahead and do things old school for this because you don't have the same plugins I do. But if you just go ahead and grab your camera tracker onto this layer, it's going to start analyzing in the background. The good thing about After Effects Camera Tracker is that it's easy to use and it's a drag and drop way of using things. Now the bad thing about it is that it's limited in its settings. If you want to go ahead and look under advanced, there's not much here. There's the average error, there's some information, sure you can do detailed analysis, but that's about it. However, what's good about After Effects is that you can do variable zoom. So other footage that I've been testing, it actually did pretty well. I'm not going to include that in this one because I just wanted to compare the same scenes, but it does work with footage where the camera is zooming in, which is great because Blender or Voodoo does not do that. After it's tracked, it's actually going to solve the camera real quick, and that's it. This is using the GPU unlike Voodoo, so it is much faster in that regard, and you can go ahead and turn on your tracking points, and here you see the tracking points that it made. It definitely did not make 900 of them, and if we want to go ahead and RAM preview this, it's going to show you the tracking points are coming and going, nothing really stays off the screen, and to my current understanding, I don't think you can make them stay off the screen. So it's a totally different way of tracking the camera. And just for a second we saw that it actually tracked that car. And of course you can compare a program from 5 years ago or 10 years ago versus After Effects. In this one you can just select that point that we don't want to track and delete it. It's gonna solve the camera again real quick and be right back, and that's how simple it is to edit these points. I think for what it is, it's pretty good. And that's the thing about the After Effects one. If it works great, but if it doesn't work, you cannot fine-tune it so you can make it work, and that's my biggest problem with it. Here's your average error is 0.46 pixels. Of course, there was also a way to look at this in Voodoo, and there's a way to look at it in Blender as well. Now what we are using to export this, because it's not about tracking the camera in After Effects, it's about exporting it into Blender. So you want to select your 3D tracker camera layer and go ahead and run a script that I'm going to include in the description of this video. It's the Atom After Effects to Blender 27 plugin, and it's actually pretty old as well. You want to just select Blender 27, put your name here, whatever you want to name it. It's gonna end up with a Python script, and from here on it's pretty much the same way. So once we're in Blender, it's pretty much the same thing as before as far as import and export goes, and this was the outcome of using the camera out of After Effects, and I can't complain. It's a pretty good track. This is not a very complex scene, of course, but it's still a pretty good track. It's not even really about the track of the camera, it's about placing these things without any exact markings or anything that you can attach to. So a lot of it is basically just based on eyeballing things. Look how far the camera is, for example, to my setup right now. It's absolutely not the way it should be. Look how small this camera is and how far that thing is. I mean, it's not going to be accurate as far as these things actually should be much closer to the camera. But for what it is right now, it's good enough. Let's look at a quick import. It's the same exact way. You want to go to scripting, and down here you want to open your script file and you want to run the script. This script you don't need to comment anything out because it's not going to have any issues in the current version of Blender, and once you ran it you're gonna end up with this L3D tracker object right here. That's it. That's all you got. You have a camera. You have a 3D track camera. It does support like a null that you can also export. It does support a couple things. I'm not using those, but that's it. It's pretty simple. I'm gonna show the animation of how this looks like, and I think it did a pretty good job. And again, so the good thing about using After Effects is that it can zoom, and the bad thing about it is that it's not free. And also the bad thing is that it's relying on this JavaScript plugin that it's gonna require to write this Python file. So if you don't have this, or After Effects or Adobe decides not to support certain things that this JavaScript is using, in that moment this whole thing is gonna break apart. So that's about it. Now let's jump into the Blender version. And here we are now in Blender. I'm gonna record this mode in 2K. I'm sorry for all the things to be pretty small, but I swear to you that the things that are interesting are going to be bigger, and I wanted you to see the entire screen on this one. Alright, number one, we're gonna jump into the motion tracking tab, which is where all the magic is going to happen. You wanna go ahead and open your sequence, self-explanatory, and you wanna set your parameters. I'm gonna set this to 147 because it is, and prefetch the scene. That's gonna load all this into the memory so you can kind of scrub through your footage. So once you prefetch the entire thing, it's gonna play from memory so you can kind of scrub through. And you want to start by setting up some tracking scenes. Now, to compare this to the other ones where you didn't have to manually set any tracking points, you want to just detect the features. This is going to pick some points based on this current frame that are good as far as differences in contrast on the image. It's not going to pay attention to whether these are actually going to stay on screen past the first frame at all, but you know. So based on the fact that I know that this whole thing is moving a certain way, I already know that some of these trackers are just going to be way too short, and I'm not even going to need these. Anything close to the edge of the frame when you have this much motion, I think is completely useless. So before even tracking anything, I'm just gonna delete those. This is gonna be interesting. This is doing the same thing. Every time I run this, it's doing the same exact points. It's just, these points are so magical. It just wants to use these points for some reason. Under motion model, you wanna make sure you're in either affine or perspective. It's important to do this. You don't just want to base on location. You want to apply a little bit of perspective into these tracking points. It's going to get you much better results. It might take a little bit longer, but it's also using GPU compute. I have it set up to GPU compute, so it's going to just be a breeze, especially with, what is this, 35 tracking points that it's got here? Yeah, about 40. But I deleted some, so it's probably about 35 tracking points, which is nothing comparing to the 900 that Voodoo did. So when you're ready here, you just want to go ahead and track forward. For you to get a good track, you want to make sure you're not only grabbing onto one area, you're actually having a bunch of tracking points all over the screen, so Blender can kind of interpolate, you know, and look at the perspective, which is ending up being more of a problem than just matching the camera movement itself. It's also the lens and the perspective. That's very important. Now with all these tracking points set up, you want to go to Solve and Refine. Make sure that you're using Refine Focal Length Optical Center and the 2 keyframes that it's using to track. So it might pick 2 better keyframes to track, and just solve the camera motion. And that's it. It's 0.4. I've gotten a 0.28 out of this same scene before, but that's because we are still having some in here that are very full of errors. So each of these tracking points have their own solve error. A solve error is basically estimating how close each of these tracking points are to the actual pixel, how true they remain to the pixel. Some of these are not going to be as good as others. For example, when you're tracking a tree in the background and there's wind, this might stay true to that exact spot on the tree, but the tree itself might be moving. So that's going to totally screw up your entire scene. And it's not going to really throw you a solve error as much as it's just going to make your whole floor kind of move and move out of place. So some of these I'm just going to go ahead and delete, because this tree does move a little bit. However, these points where it's kind of more the building, I'm gonna leave those. This right here can go. Any tracker as well that gets closer to the screen edge is gonna just disappear. Up here you will see that some of these trackers are not going all the way through. A good trick to use is you can just jump to the end and select detect features again. It's gonna select some different features and just track backwards. Gonna be more than sure some of these are just gonna disappear immediately, but let's go ahead and do that. Let's track backwards. Now because of the camera motion I had, actually most of these stayed on, and that's pretty good. So up here in the middle you will see the X and Y values of these tracks, and when you see stuff, weird stuff like this, for example these dips, you want to go ahead and check out what's going on. See, this is this tracking point right here. So if I see, this is what Blender is seeing right here, this mushy mess. I'm just gonna probably get rid of this track completely. This is terrible. It started right here where it kind of kept okay. Oh, but then it goes behind the wall, so of course how would you see that? You wouldn't. It does stay pretty good until right here. So what I can also do is just with it selected go ahead and clear the frames to the left of it, so that way we still keep that information. It's about half of the track, so that's good. What else? Now we have another dip right here, and this is also dipping behind, so I'm gonna go ahead and clear this track. This is also doing a weird dip. Okay, this I've had this before in the other video. The Blender is thinking that these two are the same frames. You can either go in and delete this track, you can refine this track, and you can change the search area of this track, so to make sure that Blender is not gonna mistake that for anything else later on. And that's what it did. By refining that track, it just kept it more dead on afterwards. And you can go ahead and do the same thing backwards, so it's kind of a uniform way of doing this. But look, you can still see the tree is kind of waving high, so it's not a good thing to do in these tracks, but I'm gonna keep this anyway. Now here at the end I have another tracking point that's just funky as hell. I don't know what's going on here. This is, where is that at? Oh, it's right here. This is just at the very end. Oh, this is tracking the car. Yeah, I don't want that at all. Okay, here's another funky one that I've seen before. This tracker is literally tracking the shoe of this guy in the bus stop. This is some crazy stuff right here. This is like in the movies. Hey, enhance that image, right? We're just gonna delete that one. What else? Funky going on right here. Oh yeah, I know this track. This is this corner of a window until it gets covered by the perspective of the truck being in front of it. So it goes crazy. So I'm just gonna clear this track after this point. And this is what I mean versus the other trackers. This is very much manual work, but it is worth it because later on you'll see it's just because of my workflow and I'm staying in Blender, it is much better to have it kind of set up this way where you can come back and fine-tune it later on. So let's take a look at our sheet here. If anything is just way too small, like something like this, I'm just gonna get rid of, and this, and I think the rest I can keep. Now of course let's solve the camera one more time. Select them and solve camera motion. Let's see what our error is at. Okay, 0.335. This is pretty good. Like I said, I've had it down to 2.8, but anything under 1 is pretty good. I've seen videos saying that anything under 3 is good. I don't agree with that at all. I want to keep this at 0.1 if I could. The lower the number, the better. I want to also place some manual markers, and that's an important thing to do if you're trying to set something up, and use the features to actually set something up, not just relying on your eye, but just also relying on the built-in features, because that's what they're there for. So by control clicking, I'm going to create a track mark right here. Make sure I'm on the first frame, of course, first. You can also hit Alt S to bring up a bigger search area to make sure that this thing is just absolutely 100% sure where it's tracking to. And I also want to make sure that right here in the corner and another corner maybe over here, I have a tracker that is on one axis, right, that I can use later on. And on the same plane, I need one more for it to determine where the plane is. So I'm gonna go ahead and put one right here on this smudge. Make it a little bigger so it can track it fine. And track all of these one more time. This is gonna disappear after a while, like right here. It's not gonna go all the way, but it's still good enough for us to lay the basics down. Look how much it kind of held onto that smudge. It's pretty good. And that's what I mean by a fine motion model. It's distorting that image, as you can see right here from this shape. It's distorting that image to match the exact track. So that's gonna be a much better track than if you just try to use location.
5 minutes later.
0.3. Okay, for the sake of this video, I'm gonna keep it at 0.3 and show you the basic setup of these planes. I want to select 3 of these and click floor. I want to select an origin point, and above the origin point I want to set a y-axis, and on the same plane as the origin point I want to set an x-axis. So x is gonna go this way, y is gonna go up and down. Now notice that the y that I'm selecting here should be like exactly above this, and this is gonna throw off our perspective, or not the perspective, but it's gonna throw off the plane and stuff that we're setting in here, but I'm okay with that for now. I'm gonna select these two and apply my scale. This is, let's call this 2 meters, and set the scale, and that's it. As far as setting these up. Oh, I see this this weird, oh, I deleted all the trackers after this point. Wow. Okay, let me go and track again from here. Okay, alright, I got the tracks back. I actually deleted all the tracks because I had them all selected, and I just clicked clear. We're pretty good. I think we're pretty good with this. I'm gonna solve the camera again. 0.32, that's pretty good. 0.32, it's one of the best ones I had. And let's take a look at setting it up. And a good way to do this is set up tracking scene, and you could just press 0, and even you can just switch back to your default view and look at your camera. And now we have the tracked scene. Now of course I set up the X and Y, and the Y, see how it was off like I was saying before? It is off here as well. But the X seems to be okay, and this floor seems to be set up fine, but it is hanging into the wall. So our X coordinate is actually the middle of this plane. So what I'm gonna do is just move this outward. So I'm gonna go G, Y, move this, gonna set it up to the edge of that wall, which is where it should be. And I can go ahead and enter edit mode, edge, and move my plane back. So now we can kind of see that it actually set up not bad for a quick job like this. It's set up a pretty good plane here. Again, I'm not blown away by it, but for the sake of this quick video, it's not the worst I've ever seen. And of course our Y coordinate is all messed up here. I'm just gonna go and rotate this cube a little bit, because even though the Y is messed up, the perspective still is okay. But that's not bad. A time saver here is what Blender did in the background. If you look at the compositor, you can see that it set up this entire thing for you, and this is where you can start off with, but you want to modify this heavily to make it better for whatever you're using it for. And let's take a look at one frame of our floating cube, and that's pretty much it. This was the Blender version of it. I like it because you can go and fine-tune your results, and I could come back right now and reset my Y coordinate and add it exactly the way I want it, and then it's gonna change everything in this view. So that's the good thing about using Blender built in. Thanks a lot for watching this video, guys. If you think that any of your friends might benefit from this knowledge, or if you want to just help me out, please share this thing on Facebook. That's really the only way I can reach more people with this. And if you're on YouTube, throw me a like, and maybe even subscribe if you want to learn more about this film that I'm making and the behind the scenes I'm making of how I'm getting this monster done. Thanks again. See you in the next one. Peace.
If I take you down, would you really hold me me down and be your best friend. She just wanna hit me with a quickie by the pool, and I'm like, yes, ma'am. Way you got me fiending for your body, you might turn me to a yes, man. Oh yeah. 80 and I'm 40, I'm a nervous bitch, I'm